You're listening to GWP News Weekly. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, and our top stories tonight we'll be looking at the ongoing government shutdown, conflict in Iran, and Kansas City Chiefs switch up. All that and much more coming your way on GWP News Weekly. And of course, in a few moments, we will have our weather and sports segment with Jacob Ulmer, so you'll have to stay tuned until then, and well, hopefully, we'll be able to survive until then because there are some major current events to get to. Some governments, of course, as you're probably well aware, some new developments on the ongoing U.S. government shutdown, as we covered recently here on GWP News Weekly, roughly a couple of weeks ago. If I recall rightly, now the U.S. is now over 1 month into the 2026 DHS shutdown. So, again, much longer. Of course, we initially covered it here on GWP News Weekly roughly a couple of weeks ago, but it had already been going on at that point. So it's now been going on for over a month, this 2026 DHS shutdown. And an important distinction to make on that, again, we refer to it generally as a government shutdown. Again, that's something that we often cover here on GWP News Weekly. Of course, a major national event. It's not difficult to understand why we'd cover something like that. But again, a distinction to make between that and, say, the most recent government shutdown we've had, which you'll recall, again, this most recent one being the longest government shutdown in our country's history. That was a much more widespread government shutdown affecting all sorts of government agencies. And again, when we get into specifics here on this current ongoing government shutdown, we call it the 2026 DHS shutdown because it primarily affects the Department of Homeland Services. Again, that particular department of the federal government. Now, that said, of course, that Department of Homeland Services deals with immigration and customs enforcement and its funding. And naturally, another area impacted by this is TSA, airport security, that is, again, which deals with, again, spring break coming up. Again, many folks out there on spring break planning for many travels. Again, this is something that we're going to see, again, when we go on these commercial flights, these airlines, when we go to the airport security, again, that is TSA, and their funding is impacted by this. Again, they are seeing a lapse in funding due to this government shutdown, and because of it, we're seeing flight delays all across the country. So, again, for your spring break, again, hopefully all of the folks, all of our listeners, viewers out there, again, who might be on spring break, well, hope you're enjoying it. Have great plans wherever you may be, whatever you may doing, whatever you may be doing, that is. Again, an important thing to be aware of, especially if you're planning to fly anywhere over spring break. Well, you might just experience some delays due to this government shutdown. But again, if you're at that airport and things are taking a bit longer than usual, well, that might be why. Now, again, of course, one of the major impacts there, TSA staffing shortages. So these airport security workers, these TSA, again, they are they receive their funding from this particular department of government. So that is why, because of the shutdown of this department, we are seeing a lapse in funding and therefore delays all across the country. A lot of flight delays, especially across the Midwest. Again, we've seen a ton of flight delays, especially at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Again, that being one of the top airports for delays in recent times. And again, major airports, again, such as O'Hare receiving some of the biggest delays. They're reporting over 3 hour security lines during spring break. So, again, an important thing you want to prepare for if you're planning to fly during this time. Now, TSA workers are receiving partial or missed paychecks. Again, this is at most in terms of new ones coming out. Again, that's not something we're seeing right now because they're not receiving new funding, again, from government as they ordinarily are because of this shutdown. So if Congress fails to act before the recess, March 30th to April 10th, again, is when that recess would be. So coming up very quickly at the end of this month, The shutdown could stretch over 60 days, near historic length. So, again, any of our longtime listeners, viewers out there will recover that we covered extensively the last U.S. government shutdown not long ago, which we now know was the longest in the history of our country. So, certainly, we're not trying to break any records here, but at the same time, there's not a clear end in sight with the current ongoing government shutdown. As we mentioned, of course, during these things, there are naturally all sorts of different interests, again, from both of the opposing sides in this, all sorts of different interests at play, and many of them sort of in order to leverage things, in order to get their interests through, again, are slow walking this. And one of the negative effects of that can be, again, some of the negative effects of these lapses in funding. Notably, again, one of the areas where the shutdown may increasingly be affecting everyday citizens are those TSA staffing shortages. Certainly, anyone who flies regularly for work or anything like that. Now, the Senate is voting again today. Lawmakers remain far from the 60 votes that are required to pass the House of Representatives Bill 7147. So we will continue to follow that. But as we mentioned there, though, not a clear end in sight at this point. Again, appears to be moving very slowly. Again, appears to be being slow walked a bit, you could say. So again, we are seeing those, and naturally, the longer this goes on, the more negative effects we'll see of some of the lapses in funding caused by this government shutdown. As we mentioned, a major one of those that, again, you might be able to see for yourself are those shortages, those related to TSA, airport security. That is, even here across our region, certainly the Kansas City International Airport, even the Springfield Airport, experiencing longer TSA delays. Rural commuters are now feeling the impact of rising gas prices. So, again, factors influencing that we'll get to here in just a few moments, but those are the most recent developments on the ongoing government shutdown. Still not a clear end in sight, but we will continue to follow it here on GWP News Weekly. So, we mentioned just moments ago, again, gas prices, things that might be influencing that. And again, for many of the folks at home, probably very likely already well aware of this. Certainly, a factor that may be playing a role in this, the conflict ongoing in Iran. Of course, there in the Middle East, Iran has now launched missile and drone attacks across the region, striking Israel, Qatar, Turkey, and Gulf states. Now, the Gulf states we talk about, again, that refers to some of these countries in the Middle East that are major suppliers, major sources of oil all across the world. So, again, certainly we've heard that in terms of economic developments, things related to the conflict. Well, that is one of them. This conflict influencing oil prices. Again, that is going to jack up oil prices. Again, the extent of the impact on that we've seen has been somewhat limited at this point, still substantial. Again, last we checked, oil was trading at roughly $98 a barrel, which again is up a bit from what it was. So again, we will continue to follow that. But one of the economic impacts that we are continuing to see, and again, similarly, as this thing continues to go on, would likely only have a continued effect to a similar tone. And that sort of is what we're looking at now. A big reason for that is, as we know, as many of you have likely heard, Iran is blocking off the Strait of Hormuz, which is a major path for those Gulf countries to export their oil. So naturally, this is making it much more difficult for oil exports. Again, there's still demand for it, but again, that supply, again, to get it exported is getting much more difficult than it was. As a result of that, we're seeing a bit of an increase in oil prices, again, which trickles down to, again, gas prices, of course, what we pay at the pumps. So, again, you may notice gas prices are up a bit as this conflict goes on. So, certainly for a number of reasons, that being one of the most immediate, affecting perhaps you and I, that it would be, again, ideal to see to begin to near an end in this conflict. Not abundantly clear how close we are to that. It's now been ongoing for roughly a couple of weeks, so not clear. Again, different analysts again suggest different things as to how long exactly this conflict will go on, and all throughout we will continue to follow it. And GWP News Weekly will be your home for all the new developments on it. Again, as news is breaking, new developments on that, you can tune in. We'll do GWP Live. Again, ordinarily we'll put out a notice a bit before, make a post on YouTube, let all of you know that we are going live, so you'll want to stay tuned for that. Any major developments, breaking news, and things like that. And, well, that's not all we do GWP live for. Again, we also do that relating to severe weather. We've seen some recent severe weather across the region, so occasionally we will go live for that. Again, often myself and co-host Jacob Fulmer. Again, other times it will be one of us or the other. So many weather updates on that. And again, if you didn't catch any of those recent ones, they still are available on our YouTube channel, that being the Great World Productions YouTube channel for playback. If you missed out on that information and you want to watch it, well, not to fret. You can still find it on the Great World Productions YouTube channel. You want to check that out if you haven't seen it, because some very top-notch coverage there from my co-host, Jacob Fulmer. Now, another recent development on the situation in the Middle East involving Iran. Hamas recently has urged Iran to slow down retaliatory strikes. So many of the people who have been, again, following international news, foreign affairs, different things like that, with any degree of closeness in recent times may be a bit shocked about that, because a very recent conflict in the region there in the Middle East that we've seen actually involved Hamas, one we actually covered extensively here on GWP News Weekly, again, all across Great World Productions. This was a topic that we touched on, was the conflict between Hamas and Israel. And during that time, and certainly for some time, Hamas has been considered a proxy of Iran. Now, again, one of the reasons here why this is being considered somewhat surprising, that Hamas is now actually urging Iran to slow down retaliatory strikes. Now, for the first time, Hamas has publicly asked Iran to limit its retaliatory attacks on neighboring countries. So, to say the least, a bit unusual for the organization known as Hamas. Now, they urged Iran to avoid hitting Arab states to preserve bonds of brotherhood. Again, certain things that these countries in the Middle East have in common, of course, is that their religion, that being Islam, again, adhering to it to varying degrees in all sorts of different ways. Certainly, there are countries across the Middle East that are more friendly to the United States than, say, Iran, those also being many of the countries that Iran has been hitting in recent times with retaliatory strikes. And even now, Hamas, which has historically been friendly with Iran, is telling them to slow down, to cool it with the retaliatory attacks on their neighboring countries. So, really something to hear. And again, that being one of the most notable developments on that front. And again, one of the most notable developments in anything, speaking in the abstract, naturally, is a testimony against interest. In other words, acknowledging a truth that is, say, unfortunate, say, against one's interest, against the interest of the party who is telling said truth. We covered a similar philosophy extensively in a recent edition of our brand new series, GWP What in the World. If you haven't caught that, you will want to tune in for that, our brand new series, GWP What in the World. If you haven't caught that, you can also submit questions for that if you haven't before. There are a few different ways to do that, you can, of course, put them in comments below our videos, below videos of GWP What in the World episodes of that. You can give us a call. The offices of Great World Productions, 417-448-0819, and let us know what those questions are. We'll try our best to answer them at 417-448-0819. Let us know what you've got to say. Now, another way to reach out, a new way to reach out. Again, a new email address, gwp-media@att.net. You can send your questions in that way. That's gwp-media@att.net. Again, all acceptable ways of reaching out to us. So, great opportunity to have your questions answered in our brand new series here on GWP, that being GWP What in the World, one of the many great things from Great World Productions coming your way all throughout the year. So, we cover that concept more extensively in our What in the World series. So if you're a bit in the dark or don't really understand what we're talking about there, maybe check it out. But again, the gist of it here, a testimony against interest. Again, I'm admitting this. This is something that's true. I may not like it, but it's true. And again, there's a certain degree of integrity that's found in that. And that is exactly what we're seeing here. This is why people find it shocking, because Hamas historically has been on good terms. They've been quite friendly with Iran. And well, now they're actually stepping up and they're telling Iran to slow down, to cool it on the retaliatory strikes on their neighboring countries. So, again, that being the reason, a bit out of character. So, again, very major developments on that front. As we mentioned, now Qatar and Turkey were both recently struck by these retaliatory strikes from Iran. Again, likely what Hamas was talking about here when they say, oh, you're going overkill. Maybe slow down on this. Maybe cool it on these strikes. So, again, the host here, in the case Hamas, made these comments. So, again, likely why they objected to these countries being struck by Iran. Again, because they have offices in both Qatar and Turkey, recently struck by Iran. Now, the signals, this signals internal strain with Iran's alliance network following the assassination of their supreme leader, as we mentioned, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Though, as we also mentioned, they do have a new Ayatollah, a new supreme leader in power, a relative of the past one, though, and not abundantly clear that there's been a regime change. In fact, it substantially resembles the regime that's already in place. So, again, not abundantly clear if there's been a great deal of improvement in terms of their leadership. That, of course, was one of the top objectives of the United States and Israel in these joint missions, with their objective, one of them being to take out Iranian leadership, but also being to take out of possible nuclear weapons being developed by Iran, a long-standing adversary of the United States. So a real risk on that front. Again, sort of wanting to address that risk. Now, again, this is significant. This adds a new diplomatic layer to the conflict and highlights fractures inside Iran's regional coalition. So, again, as we mentioned, part of that coalition for some time, we thought that Hamas was solidly allied with Iran. Again, long considered an Iranian proxy. They've been on good terms, historically speaking, but we've seen a bit of a change up here again, or perhaps Iran has just gone too far. Perhaps, again, still generally they're aligned. Perhaps Iran went just a bit too far, but we've now seen a bit of a fracture in Iran's coalition already. So, again, just continuing to follow that. Again, it's possible that we'll see more of that as things develop in the region. The conflict still very much ongoing, and we will continue to follow that here on GWP News Weekly as it continues. Now, another recent change here, moving in more regionally and a bit on the lighter side with the Kansas City Chiefs. Some recent developments there. A trade involving Justin Fields. That's right. The Chiefs have agreed to acquire quarterback Justin Fields from the New York Jets for a 2027 sixth-round pick pending a physical. So, again, after receives the necessary examination there, again, is set to be acquired by the Kansas City Chiefs. So, again, new development on there, and he is set to serve as the backup quarterback behind Patrick Mahomes as Mahomes recovers from a torn ACL. Of course, a good part of this past season, he was out because of a torn ACL, and again, likely part of the Chiefs. Again, their performance in the past season that wasn't quite on par with what it was in the past few seasons. Again, in seasons past, not long ago, we were in multiple Super Bowls. Again, didn't make it nearly as far in this past season. And again, a good part of it, their star quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, was out due to that torn ACL, and he is still recovering. That's why the Chiefs are looking to get that backup quarterback, Justin Fields. So, again, we'll see how that improves things, see if that's enough to again, to correct for the disappointment of moving over to Kansas, moving over to the dark side with the Kansas City Chiefs leaving Arrowhead Stadium, as we've already talked about recently on GWP News Weekly and all across GWP. You can check back for more on that on previous episodes. Now, their last season involved a 62.7% completion rate, 1,259 passing yards. Again, a couple of the recent thing there, 383 rushing yards. So, again, in terms of year on year, not as well as they had done in years past. A disappointing season for them, to say the least. Now, some other recent changes in their roster. Again, there's been some talk about with Travis Kelce, the Kansas City Chiefs tight end, if he is sticking around, if he's retiring. There's been a bit of back and forth on that front, but he has now been re-signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, most recent up-to-date information on that at the time of taping here. That being regarding Travis Kelce, the tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, their long snapper, James Winchester, was also re-signed. Another returning member who was re-signed, Tyquan Thornton, their wide receiver, will be sticking with them for the coming season. Now, in terms of new additions to the Kansas City Chiefs, new members that they're acquiring, that they're recruiting from elsewhere, running back Kenneth Walker III is a 3-year contract for 43 and yes, $43 million, and their defensive tackle Kairos Tonga, 3-year, $21 million contract, and Alohi Gilman, a safety for the team, signed a 3-year contract for $24.75 million. Again, a 24.75 million. Now, cornerback Kader Kohu, a new signee, received a 1-year deal. Again, we don't have the latest details on that, exactly how much he was signed for at this point, so a very recent development on that front, but we will continue to cover it as we cover the Kansas City Chiefs extensively, so you'll want to stay tuned for that and more for that coming up in the sports segment. Of course, generally, we cover sporting events most extensively over in the sports segment with Jacob Fulmer. So, again, if that sort of thing interests you, you'll have to stay tuned for the sports segment upcoming with co-host Jacob Fulmer, and you won't want to miss it. We've got some great stuff coming up. Now, another new signee of the Kansas City Chiefs, running back Emarl DeMarcado, was signed March 16th. Again, that being the latest information that we have on that. Now, again, some other potential picks that the Kansas City Chiefs may have their eyes on, that, again, some outside analysts have speculated about that the Chiefs might have their eyes on, would be defensive end Reuben Bain Jr., cornerback Colton Hood. So, a couple of possible candidates there, and again, quite possible that the Kansas City Chiefs, certainly after their past season, is looking to readdress their strategy in some different ways. Again, new recruits, new blood on the team is one of the ways that that is often remedied. So, quite possible not a great deal of confirmation on that yet, but we will continue to follow that here on GWP News Weekly. That is about the extent of recent developments in current events. Up next is weather with Jacob Vollmer.